Thank you. Ciao, Stacy. Good morning, everyone. Well, it's not only an honor, but it's a joy to come after Candace and Javon. Because if you think about it, it's a little parenthesis here, but art helps us at very different times understand. It really deposits a deep understanding of what's going on in the world in our heart viscerally. So we should never be afraid of being moved by art. And I want to thank, together with you, artists like Candace and Javon, and like Lin-Manuel, and like Nadia from Pussy Riot, and Tanya Bruguera, because they help us be better citizens. So one more round of applause for my fellow speakers and all artists. And welcome here to HD Summit. Thank you, Stacy. Thank you, Rachel. I'm super happy to be here. And what's in a t-shirt? A t-shirt contains universes. Of course, some masterpieces, like Hamilton, are immediately understandable as masterpieces. Some others are really, really humble and subtle. But a t-shirt contains history, it contains progress, it contains all sorts of ideas about globalism and what's good and bad about it. It contains racism. We all think it just contains comfort and a sense of identity, but it's so much more. And that's what design is, and that's why I want my mission in life to make people understand design, and that's what I do all the time. So here's an exhibition. The first time that we showed the white t-shirt at MoMA and we acquired it in the collection was 2004 in an exhibition called Humble Masterpieces that also contained the jelly bean, the post-it note, and strange pieces for carpentry. So all sorts of wonderful objects that are completely invisible, but nonetheless are masterpieces of design and worthy of being in the Museum of Modern Art, close to any Starry Night by Van Gogh and any pieces of Matisse, Van Gogh, and Picasso. That's very important to understand because design has a place in our world that sometimes is almost invisible. When design is great, we don't even notice it, but it is important, and that's what I do with my exhibitions. This is an example of a kind of, between quotes, normal treatment of design. You show it as materials and technology progress. It was my first show at MoMA. It was Mutant Materials in Contemporary Design, showing objects made with innovative materials. And going on with this particular lens of technology, here's another show, Design and the Elastic Mind, from 2008, that showed progress that was still to come, the interaction of design and science. Also, design, can be now ecological and environmental. If in 2008, progress was still about hydrocarbons and polycarbonate and all sorts of polymer. Right now, there are designers and architects like Neri Oxman that work instead with silkworms. So in that span of time, in about 15 years, we've gone from seeking progress through inorganic materials to instead have a stronger alliance with nature. So here you go. Even in these most traditional ways to look at design, we can understand so much more about the world, but then we can also see how some design is evergreen. I was discussing before with one of my fellow table guests what's going on today with remote work. Well, this was an exhibition in 2001 about work. It was called WorkSpheres. At that time, for those of you who were alive, it was the beginning of remote work, right? So you could dial into the server at work. Nothing ever worked. You always had the wrong plug. There was always no connection. But there was this dream of being able to work from everywhere, on a horse in the prairie or in a parking lot. And you know what? There were also many questions like, should we always work from home? When we work from home, should we simulate a commute or change our clothes so that we keep life separate, private and professional? And should we ever go back to the office again? Well, hello, it's happening today, right? We still have the same doubts, and instead of being only audio technology, it's also video. But some issues always remain the same. As remains the issue of safety. There are shellings going on in Ukraine over civilians these days. And design exists to provide safety for individuals. This exhibition in 2004 was a reaction to 9/11. So once again, history happens. Sometimes it's tragic. And design helps. In a very humble way, design doesn't change the world alone, but it is the necessary enzyme for any change to really happen, because revolutions might happen in science and in technology, but designers transform them into life. Think of the internet, lines of code until the designers of the Mosaic interface added buttons and hyperlinks and windows, and all of a sudden my grandmother could use the internet. So design is fundamental and necessary. It also is a way to understand society. This is a program, a project. It was not an exhibition. It was presented as an exhibition and rejected as an exhibition, and I understand it now. But it was about design and violence. It was prompted by the 3D printed gun. You might remember those freely available files online that allowed people with a decent 3D printer to print components of a lethal gun at home. It stunned me so much that I decided to start a 1.5-year program online talking about objects that have an ambiguous relationship with violence, when good design goes bad, right? So the Toyota 4x4, you know, all of these cars, the technicals that went from being utilitarian vehicles for farmers and for people all over the world to becoming the car of narco-traffickers and guerrillas, right? So what happens and how should we think about it? And the beautiful thing about doing something online and really making people understand design is that you couldn't only show and talk about an object, you could also ask questions. And there were questions that we asked of our readers, like, can we design a violent act to be more humane? That was in response to the redesign of the slaughterhouse, killing animals and eating animals by Temple Grandin, or is euthanasia a form of violence or a form of compassion? So that goes to tell you, you can ask these questions using design as a lead-in. You can help people understand life through design. So I would like to tell you a little more about an exhibition that happened at MoMA in 2017 called Items. It was an exhibition about 111 items of clothing, like the What t-shirt, that had a really important role in life. A New York-centric life, granted, but you know, New York-centric means pretty much the whole world, so it's good, in the past 115 years. So it started with the little black dress, very, very fundamental for New York life, and it ended with the man's suit. And it was really interesting because across these two typologies, you could find so much. If you look at this men's suit, you have the British suit, then you have Tom Brown completely unsettling it, you have the Zoot suit, and then you also have Armani making men's suits for women, so the idea of like bringing together genders and being gender fluid. Even more evident in this exhibition that happened at MoMA in 1944 that inspired our show in 2017. It was an exhibition by Bernard Rudowski, this like amazing curator that was briefly at MoMA. And you can see here the statuettes that already in 1944 addressed the body issues, the androgyny, the fluidity that we talk about so much today. It was an exhibition about the craziness of fashion and how it tried to morph bodies into ways that were not natural and were actually not even beautiful. And those statuettes, where you can see them in the background, part of the exhibition at MoMA in 2017. The exhibition talked about everything from pregnancy clothes to platform shoes to, once again, New York, the dashiki in the 1970s transformed by Black Panthers into not anymore the original West African colorful cloth, but also making it gray and really New Yorkizing it in a way. It talked about the Adidas Superstar and the Nike Air Force Ones, and it also brought back Dapper Dan. You know, right now you see Dapper Dan anywhere. Who brought him back? But MoMA. So we had some of his original knockoffs and re-elaborations of brands from the 1980s. So it was a really soaring exhibition that also touched on politics, however. You see here 4 jerseys and the hood in the middle, but the 4 jerseys are apparently just champions, right? You have Pelé on the right-hand side, Michael Jordan, but then in the middle you have Colin Kaepernick, and for those of you who are understanding of the nuances, putting Kaepernick next to Michael Jordan is kind of like loaded. And in the middle you also have the jersey for the female rugby team in New Zealand, and the fact that women's sports are always undervalued and that women are underpaid. Not to mention The Hoodie. You know, this is the 10th anniversary of Trayvon Martin's murder. And talking about the Hoodie today is as loaded as it was in 2017. The Hoodie is a symbol of both sports and comfort and American culture, and also of racism and injustice. Then you see examples of the kente cloth, for instance, which became part of Black culture in New York and sometimes was appropriated by other cultures, looked at here from the traditional Nigerian tradition outlook, and also something like the sailor sweater, the typical French sweater, that is then disrupted, and you can see the vortex there, the perturbation, the turbulence in the stripes actuated by some Irish designers. So it was really an exhibition that was at the same time joyful and serious, that was at the same time understanding of what it means to be Americans and to be New Yorkers, but also looking at the rest of the world and looking at the future. There was a big mural at the end of the exhibition that took 8 of these items, some of the most visible ones, for instance, the white t-shirt, and compared them with the global development goals and sustainability goals of the UN, and looked at how they were faring. So the attempt to understand how these items that are not only wonderful but also universal, so many of us have at least 20 of those items, really have an impact on the world, and making them apply, making them comply with the sustainability goals could be an important tool. The catalog also was an act of love and an act of deep research, because we had serious entries for every single item, and you see here, the Air Force Ones that were so important in the evolution of a new idea of sneaker, and they kind of created the sneakerheads of today, and also very important in the geography of the East Coast corridor and the connection between from Baltimore to New York City. So once again, every single item contains universes, and as a way to connect these items from New York to the rest of the world, we also had a few commissions. We commissioned, for instance, artists, these great designers from South Africa, who interpreted at that time the Adidas logo. Lucy Jones, a British designer that was working in New York, who was designing clothes for people that are on wheelchairs. If you really think about it, there's a very big difference in how you treat your elbows and your knees, and how your joints need to have more room and a better cut around you. We also talked with Hannah Tajima, who is the modest fashion consultant for Uniqlo, and she envisioned an adaptation of so many different items for culture that praise or need modesty in clothing. Verbalen Yoon from Japan, Francesco Risso from Italy. It was really a wonderful way to interpret clothes in a new way. And I'm particularly proud of this collaboration with Laduma Njogolo, who is a great knitwear designer from Nigeria, who reinterpreted the Irish Aran sweater, while we had Liz Chocailo, who thought of a moon boot for Mars instead of the moon, where instead of stomping on a new planet, we tippy-toe into it, growing the boot in the months that it takes to get to Mars, using mushroom mycelium. So you see here the amazing range of creativity amongst designers and amongst also technology in entrepreneurs. This was a new in vitro leather, and right now, about 5 years later, there are brands like Stella McCartney and many others that have really great quality plant-based leather, but at that time it was still a novelty. Science moves really fast, and once again, designers are there to bring it in our homes and on our shoulders. It's very important to understand how this simple, humble garment contains universes, once again. Another example that was more openly and overtly about the environment is Broken Nature, an exhibition that I organized in 2018 in Milan, which is the city where I come from, in the Triennale, which is the building where I started my career in my early 20s, being a gopher and just running around and bringing coffee and painting walls. So I really smelled the building, I knew it. And it's an exhibition that allowed me to really take advantage of Milanese culture and of Milanese people. You know, in Milan, you've all been there, you're designers. Design is normal. It's something that you talk about just like you talk about politics and football. You go to the hair salon and you find people in Us Magazine and then Domus, Abitare. So people talk about it and participate. And when the Salone del Mobile, the yearly fair happens in Milan, there's my baker that asks me for tickets, asks me what to go see, so I knew people would come. It was an exhibition for citizens, and it did work. The grand entrance of the Triennale is a place that I love and that I can really feel with my stomach, and you see here the entry to the exhibition. It's a little bit of a grand building. It was built during fascist era, so it's not a subtle and light building, but we took advantage of that. And you know, when you want to really talk about something that might require some sacrifice, the best thing to do is to make it look and feel like a win-win situation. So for a really long time, being sustainable had a little tinge of self-atonement, you know, the idea that you had to give up something. We wanted to prove that you can be really constructively sustainable and responsible without giving up the kind of delight and surprise and comfort that design has delivered to us for so many centuries. So we wanted to further this idea of restorative design. You can be a good citizen in many different ways, and you can still be a sexy citizen, an elegant citizen, a light-headed citizen. You can be all you want to be and still be responsible. And we tried to present many different strategies for that to happen. And the exhibition was a success for that reason, because we wanted everybody who came to the show to leave with a feeling and a knowledge of something they could do in their lives without too much sacrifice to make the world a better place. It started out with these grand views of change, the images of NASA of change you can find on a website. They are in the public domain, and they show different changes on Earth of the same place after either a few months or a few decades. They're really haunting. We continued then, let's lower a little bit there. Thank you so much. With a connection with other species. This little octopus, female octopus called Mercy, was the star of the show. It kind of showed how there are some instincts that transcend time. She was placed next to a 3D printed reconstruction of an ammonite shell. Ammonites were the ancestors, millennia, millions of years ago, of octopi. She looked at it for a few seconds, and then she felt like, home, yay, and she went in. So it was this idea of time and differences between species not existing if you really set the conditions for that to happen. There were then examples, in this case, little look, thank you so much, examples of actual restoration. This is an Australian designer that makes these trellises of 3D printed ceramics and then drops them with a little few seeded corals, drops them in the coral reef to try and rebuild it. It'll take decades, but it actually is working. So this is like literal restoration. I'm telling you about the various strategies. But then we wanted also citizens to be able to see what they could do in their lives. And there was a beautiful episode where this typical Milanese lady, you know them, she must have been around 70, with like skirt suit, perfect bag, perfect shoes, and also the hair a little coiffed. She came to me running and she said, "Are you the curator?" I said, "Yes, I am. Oh, I really want my family to know about this." What you see in the middle is a green burial pod. So the idea is that you put the corpse after somebody dies in that egg, and then you bury it with the kind of tree that you want to grow in the few years on top of it, seeded. And this is a person that becomes a tree. And she was so moved that she took it very seriously, and this place actually exists. So that's what we wanted from the show with my great curatorial team. We wanted people to really understand what they could do and to understand that life is about systems. This is the beautiful work by Forma Fantasma that was meant to show the underbelly, the horrible underbelly of the e-waste systems in the world. You know, whenever we throw away electronics and we don't recycle it appropriately, it ends up in landfills, of course, in the part of the world that depends on us and that doesn't have as much power and money. And the horrible labor practices and exploitation, not to mention the environmental consequences, are hidden. And that's what designers like Forma Fantasma do. By making gorgeous furniture that might be in any of the best offices in the world, all made by e-waste, they attract people's attention. It's almost like a Trojan horse. And then next to them are these interviews with people and humanitarians, NGOs, that actually talk about what goes on in the e-waste system. So making people understand the consequences, systemic consequences of our actions is something that designers also do. Another system, for instance, is the system of pollution and the fact that so much of the phosphates that have been just thrown in rivers all over the world have generated a proliferation of algae. And here is a lab in France that goes all around the world and teaches people how to take their local algae and make them into bioplastics that then can be printed into vessels from the traditional material culture of the place. They've done it already in France, they've done it in Sardinia, my native Sardinia, they've done it in Turkey. It's the idea of having this lab that helps people harness the pollution they have generated and take it out of the environment. The last part of the exhibition was about the most important understanding that we all need to achieve. I told you before that we should not be afraid to be moved. And we should not be afraid to create empathetic connections with other human beings and also with other animals. This crazy designer, Thomas Thwaites, I love him tremendously, decided to decamp and become a goat. He felt that he had enough of being a human being. He wanted like a little break as a goat. And so he worked for literally years with like animal scientists, studied everything about goats. And then he designed this contraption to actually be a goat. He also had an outsourced gastrointestinal system, and for 4 days he went up, decamped to the Alps, and lived with the goats. And the goats were very generous and actually accepted him. And it was just like this beautiful experiment. And you say, is this design? Well, you know what? The difference between design and art at this point doesn't matter very much. It's more of a difference that happens in the market rather than in the designer's or artist's mind. But it was actually very moving, as was the idea to think in this great Japanese manga of this little boy. It's so timely today. This little boy that can see and talk to microbes and bacteria, right? So it's this beautiful manga that was also part of the exhibition showing this completely different world that this boy has and talking to bacteria and microbes. But possibly one of the most moving and favorite of mine was this work by Laura Aguilar, a bona fide artist, photographer, who unfortunately I did not get to meet because she died too young, 3 months after I discovered her work and wanted to go meet her. She was in Los Angeles and she has a very wonderful body of work, but this particular body of work was my favorite. It's her body. It's her body, not perfect by any standards that we've had for centuries, but still amazingly beautiful in connection with nature, and especially in connection with boulders. We used to see people connect with animals, try to talk to animals, but boulders usually are a little tough, right? But instead, she said that she felt a kinship with boulders, and she photographed herself, not only with boulders, but also bodies of water. It's the most beautiful way to understand the kind of connection that we need in order to produce whatever we produce in life, whether we are, scientists, whether we are IT experts, or whether we are designers, in order to connect with others. And to me, the most amazing congratulation that I could get from the exhibition was that people came to me and told me that they were moved. And at that time, remember, the kids were doing Fridays for the Future. They were following Greta's diktat, and they were not going to school on some Fridays to protest for nature and for the world. They would gather in our exhibition to start their marches. I mean, I still get shivers. Can you get a better success with an exhibition than this? I don't think so. So it really is important for me to continue thinking of how design interacts in the world. And this is the last project that I would like to tell you about, which is Design Emergency. At the beginning, during the lockdown, my husband and I were at home in New York on Broadway near Canal. I mean, usually it's a mess, and instead it was like dead silent. And we were looking at each other saying, oh my God, what's going on? It's the end of the world, So, and I remember that at night, Larry was always listening to Fat Joe, the hip hop artist, who was doing all these IG lives with all of his friends from all over the world. They were just coming online and just like talking, riffing. And he said, Paola, you could do that. I'm like, could I? So I went to my best friend, Alice Rawsthorne, who's in London. She's the foremost design critic, possibly in the world. If you haven't read her books, she's amazing. And I told her, Alice, and she's like, And then we said, how should we call it? And design emergency. Then we went to our friend Frith Kerr, who's a great designer. In 3 days, we had the identity, and we were off to the races. And we wanted to highlight the role that design was taking on in the pandemic. Talking with designers of all kinds, we started out, for instance, you see the coronavirus is that gray blob with dots around it. That's why it's called corona. But the image that we see today was designed. It was designed by Alyssa Eckert and her collaborator, Dan Higgins, at the Center for Disease Control, right? So they branded the virus. They made it into that round, deep water mine with the mean Hellraiser red S proteins that all of a sudden became the scary brand of COVID-19 all over the world. An act of design that we live with every day. As was an act of design, I don't know if you remember this amazing New York Times cover when we reached 100,000 deaths. For the first time in its history, the New York Times didn't have any kind of image or any kind of big title except the first one on the cover, just the names of the 100,000 people that had died. These are acts of design that transcend any kind of consideration. And some of the designers we interviewed were not designers per se. Marco Ranieri is an anesthesiologist in Bologna, and he designed with some of his friends and a friend that had a plastics, typical Italian thing, a plastics company. They designed the valve to split ventilators when there was a dearth of ventilators at some point. And on the right-hand side, you see the campaign for COVID awareness in New Zealand that, according to Alice and I, was the best designed. So we actually interviewed Mark Dalton from there to understand how they did it. And you see, this was the whole array. We interviewed Sally Rabi Khan in Senegal, and Neri Oxman, because at some point we had to think also, not that the pandemic is over, but life after the pandemic. And we decided to start interviewing designers that are actually doing a lot to make the world a better place in many different ways and aspects, from AI to working with silkworms to finding a better way to express identity of their nation, Senegal in this case. So we kept on going, and we are still keeping going. During the pandemic, we talked, for instance, with the Afghan Dreamers, this amazing group of teenagers from Herat in Afghanistan that were just like real geeks and that were actually making ventilators with their own hands while studying engineering. They are safe right now outside of Afghanistan, thank God. Or we talked with the fashion designers in Belgium that had retooled all of their network in a few days to produce PPE. Or with visualization designers that talked about the vulnerability of certain counties in the United States taking all sorts of socioeconomic and cultural factors into account. So designers were everywhere, all the time, helping us understand, and right now they still are. All over the world, they are trying to do better. Vinu Daniel in Kerala, India, trying to purport Mahatma Gandhi's idea that you should build with what you find on place in a 15-mile radius, and therefore sometimes building with trash and with mud. Or on the right-hand side, Xu Tiantian, who is based in Beijing, but works a lot in a valley of 400 villages to try and restore rural pride with little interventions that she calls architectural acupuncture that are designed together with the community. See how beautiful these designers are. They really act very humbly, but sometimes they are not humbly at all. I don't know if you've heard about the Great Green Wall of Africa. The idea is to build a belt of greenery at the southern edge of the Sahel Desert that goes from the Atlantic Ocean to the Indian Ocean, 21 countries that sometimes are in conflict, acting together to use their own agricultural culture, oh, that's a really bad alliteration, but you understand what I mean, to create this belt all together and replace the lungs of the earth that are being depleted right now in the Amazons. So there are all these amazing ideas that are happening. There are people like Francesca Coloni that are studying refugee camps. There are people like Peter Bilak that are trying to recuperate lost languages by giving new shape to the alphabets that would otherwise go completely forgotten. There are designers of all kinds that are doing all sorts of interventions into the world. And Alice and I keep going. Just 2 days ago, we did this double act called Hidden Heroines of Design to celebrate International Women's Day and try to bring to the surface some people that were our mentors or that were completely forgotten at the beginning of the 20th century because maybe they were queer or simply they had a double X chromosome. So we try to keep going, also because we think that there is always a design emergency. And by the way, little plug, we're going to come out with a book in May. So it's become like a great way, a great franchise for us, and also a way to be close because we've been friends forever, but we have never worked together. It's really a wonderful way to be together. What's coming next? Well, to keep going in this direction, I'm about to install a gallery at MoMA that is all about systems, and it's anchored by this piece that is in the collection, which shows, it's by Kate Crawford and Vladan Joler, and it shows everything that is behind an Amazon Echo, the systems of extraction of labor, of materials, and also of data that go into an Amazon Echo. Once again, to try and give people a sense of the systemic nature of the way we work. And then in the fall, an exhibition on the video games that are in MoMA's collection. And you might say, what is so important about video games? Aren't they all just about thinking of something else, distraction and evading reality? Well, not necessarily. Of course, games like Pac-Man and like The Sims or SimCity or Tetris, of course they are distraction. But they are amazing feat of visualization design, and nonetheless, there are some games like This War of Mine and Papers, Please that are instead, once again, ways to bring us back to reality. This War of Mine was designed by this Serbian design group, and it's about the war. It's a war game, but instead of being, like in most war games, the soldier that's shooting people, you are a civilian trying to survive. How amazing is it to think about it today? This is a game from 2014 that was inspired by Sarajevo, and right now with what's going on in Ukraine, we can feel this game in an even stronger and deeper way. And actually, the designers from This War of Mine have been sending all of the profits from the sales of their game to the Ukraine. And next to it is Papers, Please by Lucas Pope, in which the player, you, is a border control agent, a homeland security agent, and you have to decide on the spur of the moment whether to give asylum or not to the people that are coming in front of you. These are games too. I mean, call them games. We think that games are games, and instead sometimes they're not games, but still they are great examples of ways to bypass our defenses and really deposit some awareness of the world in our hearts and souls. And it's very important to understand right now that this particular act is something that museums have to celebrate and museums have to really further. There are so many artists in the world right now that are fighting a good fight. And even though design and art might not solve the amazing situation that's going on, you see here just 3 examples of an attempt by designers and artists to do something about Ukraine, from fashion to, I was talking about Nadia from Pussy Riot before, who is selling an NFT of the Ukrainian flag and has already raised more than 7 million using new technology and distributed organizations for Ukraine, or the Ukrainian-Russian artist Alyosha that staged a performance in front of the monument in Kyiv. Not to mention the designers of the cover of The Economist and so many other designers that are in front of our eyes every single day and design the communications devices that we use, that are really trying to make us understand what's going on. So a humble way to end would be to think of this quote by a mathematician from the beginning of the century, Frank Ramsey. Discounting the interests of future people is ethically indefensible and arises merely from the weakness of imagination. There's no reason to not be empathetic. It doesn't cost us anything, and it's just a symbol of narrow-mindedness. That's why the fact that a t-shirt contains multitudes is my little way to contribute to the world. Thank you very much. Oh, here comes Stacy running. Thank you. I should have given you a little sign.
I'm coming. Amazing. All right, so we have some time for a few questions. Does anyone have any questions for Paola?
There we go. So anybody who knows me in this room knows that I'm the opposite of a minimalist. I'm curious on your thoughts of what the role of decoration is in design. So like when you look at Memphis style and the exuberance of it, most of the design exhibits I go to focus more on a minimalistic functional view, but what do you see as the role of decoration?
Well, I love decoration, first of all, and decoration can be a really powerful weapon. So I just showed these examples today, but I never shy away from decoration. It was a weapon and a political device in the arts and crafts movement in the 19th century with William Morris. So sometimes taking motifs that are deeply part of somebody's traditional culture and surfacing them is a way to almost incite citizens to take over again. That is in some instances. But decoration also, when it's good, is a form of respect. You know, just a few weeks ago, a wonderful person, Dr. Paul Farmer, died. He was the founder of Partners in Health, which was this incredible association that went to try and deliver high-quality medicine to underdeveloped countries or underserved countries all over the world. And he used to say something that I deeply believed in, that beauty is a form of respect, that embellishing something is not a superficial or stupid act. It's actually trying to make something more respectfully studied and developed for people. So, you know, there's all sorts of decoration. Here we're generalizing, but it is a powerful force. It is part of design. And if I don't show it that often, it's because it's not one of the threads that we have at MoMA per se, but never discounting it.
Amazing. Any other questions for Paola? Oh, we're all quiet today. No one? All right, well, I have a question about your process. So what is your creative process? How, you know, what's your day-to-day in terms of like researching and finding and, you know, doing all that you do?
It's very chaotic. So I proceed in a very non-analytical way. I'm always reading, I'm always traveling, I'm always watching from all social media, and I'm always bookmarking. But I don't have only one place where I bookmark, there are like 5. So I'm always trying to make sense, but I have several ideas going on at the same time. Like for instance, right now, I am 3 years ago, I proposed an exhibition to MoMA about interspecies. It was not really completely accepted, but it still is kind of like there. So every time I see that, I bookmark things. So it really is, last week I was at a symposium with these beautiful designers and artists that are instead talking about the environment. So that's what I do. But when I have finally a project, then I start shaping things. So I go into production mode, and then the whole cloud of ideas start taking shape. First selection, second selection, then the third selection happens in the space, because you immediately see, I'm an architect by training, so I'm like you all. You know, when you have the space in front of you, you start organizing things and seeing what relationships are made visually and spatially. So it really is about, it's a sculpting method, but it's quite chaotic.
Is there one part of the process that you love the most?
Yeah, I was telling Rachel last night, I love being on the floor. You know, like when I start producing and making, that's my favorite moment.
Yeah.
It really is the best. When you have the whole crew working with you and you make things happen, that's the best.
And do you watch how people interact? Like, do you kind of sit back and watch it all?
When during the production mode?
Yeah.
I have to because of the union system at MoMA,
yeah.
But you know, I'm supposed not to do anything, not to touch the art. But I have to say, they give me a pass. I mean, I've been there 28 years, and I remember the first time it happened that they told me that I couldn't touch. I'm like, why? And they said, oh, because union. I'm like, guys, that's why I'm in this business. And they were like, okay. So they let me, but you know, when somebody comes, we're all like, you know?
Not touching. Anyone else? Otherwise, I'll keep going. Oh, yes.
Yeah. Moment in my career where I was speechless, many. But when I saw Laura Aguilar's work, that was one. You know, I was like really, but there are many all the time. That's why I was talking about not being afraid to be moved, because it happens so often. And the funny thing is that sometimes it happens with things that don't leave other people speechless. Like I remember one night, I was having a fight with my husband. It was like midnight. We were on 6th Avenue in New York, and you know, we were having a fight, and all of a sudden I stopped, and he was like, "Why you stop? We're having a fight." I'm like, "They changed all the traffic light. Look at them." You know, it's just like, so, and he just like got even madder, but, but that's what I'm saying. I can really be rendered speechless by Laura Aguilar or by a new fire hydrant. So.
That's amazing. Anyone else have a question for Paola?
Yes,
Yes,
one here.
Philip.
Oh, yeah.
So, like Art Basel, this last Art Basel, NFTs, right?
Yeah. I'll repeat the question.
Was one of the premier museums in the world. How do you see that being a part of MoMA or not being a part? Is it here for?
Thank you.
I was asking about NFTs and do you see the future impact? Is it something that's going to be a small part of the art world, or here for now, here for 20 years from now? You know, what is your opinion about the future and how that's going to impact MoMA?
Thank you for the question. So NFTs are here to stay. And the art world has become one of their first applications, most visible, but they will be part of life. So it's not going to be only art. Art jumped on it immediately in a very interesting way. At MoMA, so there's three ways to deal with NFTs. You buy them, you mint them, or you help them happen, right? So far at MoMA, what we've done is we have decided, first of all, that it's important to become familiar with the technology because it will be part of our future. Second of all, we want to make sure that our principles and our mission remains really focused all the time and that NFTs adapt to it and not vice versa. And third of all, we want to make sure that whatever we do advances art and artists. So our first foray was to work with a platform that is very reputable, it's called Feral File, run by Casey Rias at UCLA, so impeccable. And with one artist, Refik Anadol, who already has a lot of knowledge about the field. And we offered, as MoMA, we offered the metadata from our collection for free. And we took a very small percentage. So we made sure that whatever we did went to the artists and to the platforms. And it was really very successful. He unleashed this AI that looked at the MoMA collection and produced new art. So it was really fabulous. If you want to look at it, Feral File, it's really fascinating. And right now, we're looking at NFTs from many different viewpoints. One is membership, of course, because with NFTs, you can really grow a new community, and by giving tokens that give different access to MoMA. Then, of course, retail, our retail department, but keeping it separate from MoMA collection as usual. So we're not going to just mint stuff that is in the MoMA collection. That would be lazy and exploitative. We're going to actually go in different ways. And then there's the art part where we can mint and collect. So we're looking at everything very thoughtfully and thinking of our next experiments. But to answer your question, oh yes, they're going to be a big part, not only of the art world, but of life.
Interesting. Question there, yeah.
Is your department involved with the MoMA store, which is a very, I just got actually an email this morning from the MoMA design store. So I know it's a big profit center for the museum, and I wonder, is your department as more of a fine arts side, are you involved with the retail?
Oh yeah, no, our department is not fine arts, it's architecture and design, and there's always a curator that works with retail that goes to all the product selection meetings. I did it for 20 years and now I'm letting other people in the department do it, but yeah, always. And sometimes, we had the best conversations. And to answer your research question, I got a lot of also objects and research from them. So yeah, it's a very tight and wonderful collaboration.
Awesome. Anyone else? So just going off of NFTs and 28 years, and how do you keep relevant? Like, how do you keep MoMA on the forefront? I mean, it's a testament to you and to the museum, but it's not easy, especially with the various museums out there and the competition.
Well, it's not difficult because of the amazing colleagues that I have, and I'm saying it not to be cute. It's true. I mean, sometimes I'm in meetings with my colleagues from the other departments. We have painting and sculpture, prints and drawings, photography, film, and then I'm from performance and media. And just listening to them, we're all out scouting and absorbing. We all have, and for most of us, really, even those that deal with art history, the focus is on today.
Yeah.
It's how do you use art history to deal with the problems of today, right? So I also run another department at MoMA that's called MoMA R&D, where, it's kind of like a tongue-in-cheek way to use the word R&D, but basically I'm trying to prove that museums can be the R&D of society. So I run these salons in which, the topics are sometimes death or protest, or hair, and they are these objects these concepts or topics that once again contain universes. And I always have either an artist or one of my curators, colleagues, be part of it. And we really want people to be able to use museums not as only places of contemplation of art on walls, but places where you can really you can mull over life and you can be helped. Now, of course, museums in most cases tend to be places, and we are in Midtown Manhattan, great place for tourists, not such a great place for some of the communities that we would love to have. And so that's the biggest effort sometimes, right? To let the world know that we're not only about the Demoiselle d'Avignon or Starry Night, right? So that's the effort sometimes.
What have you taken away from this new R&D outlet?
Oh my God, if you want to go online, I think you would be inspired. You search MoMA R&D and you find it. You can do so much. The last salon was 2 weeks ago. It was about breath. And it looked at COVID. It looked at Black Lives Matter and Trayvon Martin's 10th anniversary. It looked at all these different aspects of breath and breathing. We didn't really look at the yoga and deep breathing part because we didn't have enough time, but you cut through everything. Or we had one on Renaissance or Revolution, because so many people say that after a pandemic you have a Renaissance, but usually a Renaissance is handed down by the aristocrats, which today is Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and company, and is a revolution from the ground up perhaps a better way to go? So it's so, and we had Tania Bruguera from Cuba there, so it really is a moment to talk about what's going on in the world. And right now, I would be tempted to do a salon on war, but it's too much, it's too close, and I don't feel adequate. So we're dealing with other things instead. But it's important, so yeah, MoMA R&D, you can watch them all if you want.
Yeah, Craig.
Get older, what advice would you give to educators to incorporate more arts and humanities in the standardized education as opposed to standardized testing?
Thank you for the question. I'm gonna not look at you because the microphone works better if I look in this direction, but I'm looking at you, and it's an excellent question. It's incredibly important. And one of the tragic predicaments in many parts of the world is that the moment there's a crisis, the first thing governments do is to cut the culture budget because as cultural agents, we don't have the right metrics to prove in an easy way how important we are, right? And how, to the destinies of society, culture is much more constructive than the financial sector, for instance. So it is a fight, but the humanities are once again a way for citizens to have their own critical sense. And at a time when there's so much pollution of information, so much confusion, so many ethical distractions and diversion, the humanities would provide a way for individuals to be themselves and to have an identity and a power, a critical power. So it's a big fight because not only is it not evident to so many policymakers, but also it might be counterproductive. They might have to give away some of their agency and their power to individual citizens. So I think it's an uphill battle, but a good battle to fight.
Nice, love it. Anyone over there that I can't see? Okay. So when did you know that, I mean, your scope and what you've done is so incredible. When did you know that design's impact would be, you know, your career, your life's work? I mean, was it always?
No, it was not, not at all. So I grew up in Milan, and I used Milan for everything that it was worth. Age 15 to 18, I was working in Armani's PR office because my sister's best friend's mom was the PR office. So it was just like this thing. I was a kid, and I was just doing my thing there, keeping the press separate from the buyers at fashion shows. Then I was, you know, I went into economics. I studied economics for 2 years. And as a reaction, because I was so bad at economics, I went to the opposite university, which is architecture. At that time, it was total chaos. We were 15,000 students, only in Milan, only in architecture. So it was really chaos. And that's what attracted me to it. But I never knew that I would become a curator, that I would become a design curator, or maybe I did without knowing it. It was like, I always believe in vectors, right? And then surf. So you have a vector in life and you move in that direction. And the way I did it, at least, was that I was paddling a lot, so a lot of hard work, but then catching the wave and going with it. But I didn't know it at all. I believe that growing up in Milan is definitely one of the reasons why I'm in this job, because I saw that great design is normal. It shouldn't be in stores where you have a surcharge of 20% if you are not an architect or a designer, that it should be at the corner. You shouldn't go to a special neighborhood. I mean, I just saw what design could be, and I brought that to bear. And I learned instead the strengths of New York. Like I knew nothing about contemporary art. So every place has a great something to contribute, and that's why it's so important to know about your culture and then bring it to the world.
Yeah, love it. And you talked a bit about this amazing team. How do you collaborate with them? What's your process with them? And how has your leadership style changed or evolved, especially over the past couple of years?
I remember that many years ago I was teaching at UCLA, and the students were stunned because I wanted to do what I always did when I was at school, which is oral tests, right?
Yeah.
So not multiple choice, etc. And they didn't know how to handle it. And sometimes I get the same when I have new teams, because I really, really, really need some arguments. And I really like to work in a collaborative way. So, and to give responsibilities even to interns. So that's my style. And sometimes it goes terribly wrong. But in most cases, it goes really right because people feel that they are really invested in the whole game. And that's the best thing. I mean, really, especially, I think maybe in every endeavor. I saw, my father was a surgeon and a university professor, and I saw him act the same with his students, like giving them the scalpel early on. There are some surgeons that never give away their control, and instead he was doing it early on. I wouldn't have wanted to be that patient, but still, I mean, you have to learn somewhere, right?
You gotta learn somewhere. Maybe not that way.
He was always there. He was always there, just ready to step in.
Hopefully. That's awesome. Awesome. All right, well, we're at the end, so just want to thank you so much for being
Thank
here.
you.
It's such a
Thank you for
pleasure.
inviting
Thank you
me.
to Paola.
Thank you also to Rico, Peter, and Jean, and Rachel. Thanks a lot. Thank you.